My name is Noel Briggs. I'm 27, a freelance graphic designer living in Boston. Yesterday, I was still that quiet woman who paid rent late, drank coffee alone, and missed her grandmother every single day. Today, I'm suddenly the heiress of her entire estate, her house, her savings, even the little orchard where she taught me to climb trees. But the moment the lawyer handed me the keys, my parents, who abandoned me when I was 12, walked back into my life as if nothing had happened. And they didn't come alone. My older brother, the golden child they always loved, stood beside them with a smirk that told me exactly what they wanted, everything my grandmother left to me. That was the moment I realized blood doesn't always mean family, and if I didn't fight back, I'd lose not only my inheritance, but also the last piece of her I had left. Tell me, what would you do if the people who once threw you away came back only to rob you again? The room went silent after I spoke those words in my head, though no one else could hear them. The lawyer shuffled his papers awkwardly, as if sensing the tension that had just walked in. My father was the first to move. He took one step closer, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor of the office. "It's been a long time, Noel," he said, his voice carrying that same tone of authority I remembered from childhood, the kind that used to make me shrink. But this time, I didn't shrink. I tightened my grip on the silver ring my grandmother had left me, the one she wore every day of her life. Memories of my grandmother flooded me right there. The smell of her lavender soap, the warmth of her hug after school, the way she would brush my hair and tell me, "You are stronger than you think." She became my world the moment my parents drove away and never looked back. I was 12 then, standing on the porch with tears running down my face as their car disappeared down the street. My grandmother held my shoulders so tightly that night, whispering that I wasn't alone, though I felt emptier than ever before. That's why today hurt even more. They had the audacity to return only when money was involved. My mother's eyes darted around the lawyer's office, scanning the walls, the polished desk, the folders stacked neatly. When her eyes finally met mine, they softened in a way that might have fooled anyone else. "We only want to talk, sweetheart," she said. Sweetheart. The word made my stomach turn. She hadn't called me that since the night she left. I could still remember her closing the door without looking back, the suitcase already in her hand. The echo of that night was louder than her voice now. And then there was my brother, Daniel, always perfect Daniel. I remembered sitting at school plays where my parents clapped only for him, where every trophy in our house bore his name. He didn't abandon me like they did, but he never stood up for me either. He just let it happen, and now here he was, standing taller than ever, smirking as though my pain was a private joke only he understood. "Looks like Grandma really favored you," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We should continue with the reading," he suggested, though his voice trembled, but I couldn't move on yet. My chest burned with too many unsaid words. "You don't get to show up here and pretend this is normal," I told them, my voice shaking but loud enough to echo off the walls. You left me with nothing but her." My father's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth to respond, but my mother placed a hand on his arm, a rehearsed gesture of false calm. She turned back to me with that same soft look, like she was the victim in all of this. "People make mistakes, Noel," she said, her voice sweet, her eyes wet with crocodile tears. "We're here now, aren't we? We just want to be a family again." I wanted to laugh, a bitter, hollow laugh. A family again? My chest tightened as if I were about to explode. The only family I had ever known had been buried a few weeks ago. She was the one who stayed, the one who fought for me, the one who gave me a home when they tossed me aside like garbage. And now, with her gone, they wanted to swoop in and take everything she left me. The lawyer's office suddenly felt suffocating. The air was heavy, pressing down on me from all sides. I looked at the papers on the table, the ones declaring me the sole heir, and I realized that this wasn't just about money. This was about dignity. This was about protecting my grandmother's love, her memory, her belief in me. I couldn't let them rewrite the story. Not again. The lawyer hesitated, his eyes flicking between me and the three people who were supposed to be my family. He looked uncomfortable, like he had walked into the middle of a storm he hadn't signed up for. "If we could all just take a seat," he said softly, gesturing to the leather chairs in front of his desk. I lowered myself into one of them, my fingers still wrapped tightly around my grandmother's silver ring. My parents sat across from me, Daniel next to them, his knee bouncing with impatience. The air smelled faintly of ink and old books, but underneath it all was something sour, the stench of betrayal that no candle could ever cover. As the lawyer began reading the will again, my mind drifted back. I was 13, sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, the smell of fresh-baked bread filling the room. She was teaching me how to knead the dough, her hands guiding mine. Outside, the world felt cold and unkind, but inside her house, I had warmth, love, safety. That day she told me, "Noel, one day you'll have to fight for yourself. Promise me you won't let anyone make you small." At the time, I didn't understand why she said it with such sadness in her eyes. Now, sitting across from the people who had shrunk me down to nothing, I finally did. Mrs. Briggs has left her entire estate, including the family home, savings, and personal belongings, to her granddaughter, Noel Briggs, the lawyer recited. His words echoed in my ears, each syllable heavy with finality. My mother's face twitched, the fake softness cracking for just a second. My father leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed into a hard line. Daniel smirked again, whispering something under his breath that I couldn't catch, but I didn't need to. I knew it wasn't kind. "She can't possibly handle all of this alone," my mother interrupted suddenly, her voice laced with concern that felt more rehearsed than genuine. "She's young, she's unstable. It would be irresponsible to give her everything." Her eyes flicked toward me, trying to paint me as incapable. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable again. "The will is clear, ma'am," he said firmly. "The estate belongs solely to Ms. Briggs." For a moment, I almost believed I was safe, but then my father leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Wills can be contested," he said. His words slithered through the air like poison. "Blood ties matter, and you can't erase those." My stomach twisted. I wanted to scream, to remind him that blood ties hadn't mattered 15 years ago when he walked away. Instead, I sat frozen, the memories flooding me like a broken dam. I remembered the night they left, me standing at the window, watching their taillights fade, clutching my teddy bear so hard I thought it would tear. My grandmother's voice trembling as she promised I was worth more than their absence. I had believed her, because I had to. But the wound never closed. Now here they were, tearing it wide open again. Daniel finally spoke up, his voice dripping with mockery. "Come on, Noel, you really think you deserve all of this? You've been living off Grandma your whole life. Maybe it's time you learned to share." He leaned back casually like this was a game he'd already won. "Share?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "She raised me, she saved me, and you think you can just waltz back in and take what she left me? After all these years?" My voice cracked, but I didn't care. The rage behind it was enough to shake the room. My mother sighed dramatically, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "We made mistakes," she said, "but we're still your parents. We still have a right to be part of this family." Her words hit me like a slap. A right? They had surrendered every right the night they abandoned me. My grandmother had been the one who sat through my nightmares, who worked 2 jobs to put food on the table, who stayed up late to help me finish art projects when I wanted to give up. They hadn't earned the word family. I looked down at the ring again, tracing its smooth surface with my thumb. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, "Protect what is yours, they will come for it." My chest tightened as I realized she had known this moment would come. She had seen through them long before I did. The lawyer cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. "If there are no further questions, I suggest we conclude today's session. Any disputes can be addressed through legal proceedings." Legal proceedings. The word sent a chill through me. I knew this wasn't over. My parents' faces told me everything. They weren't walking away. They never came back for me as a child, but they were back now for the house, the orchard, the savings, the life my grandmother had built with her bare hands. And I was the only one standing in their way. As they rose from their chairs, Daniel leaned close, his voice a whisper meant only for me. "You won't win, Noel. We always get what we want." His breath smelled faintly of mint, but the bitterness underneath it was unmistakable. I sat there long after they left, staring at the documents on the table. My hands were trembling, my throat dry. For the first time since my grandmother's death, I wasn't just mourning her, I was preparing for war. The walk back to my grandmother's house felt heavier than it should have. The streets of Boston were alive that evening, cars honking, people rushing home, the smell of hot pretzels from a food cart drifting through the air, but I barely noticed any of it. My mind was replaying every word my parents had said, every smirk Daniel threw my way. I clutched the folder from the lawyer's office so tightly my knuckles turned white. It wasn't just paper inside. It was my grandmother's voice, her legacy, the proof that she had chosen me. And now they wanted to rip it out of my hands. When I stepped onto the porch of her old Victorian house, the creak of the wood under my feet felt like a greeting. I paused at the door, staring at the worn brass handle she touched countless times. For a moment, I imagined her voice welcoming me home, telling me to take my shoes off and wash up before dinner. But when I pushed the door open, silence greeted me instead. Silence, and the faint lingering scent of her lavender perfume that still clung to the walls. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it. The floral couch, the stack of books by her chair, even the unfinished knitting project on the armrest. My chest tightened, grief clawing its way up my throat. I dropped the folder on the table and sank into her chair, running my hands along the fabric as though it could bring her back. Memories rushed in uninvited. The nights we'd sat here together, sipping hot cocoa while she told me stories of her childhood. The way she would let me stay up late during thunderstorms because she knew I was afraid of the thunder. I could still feel the weight of her arm around my shoulders, grounding me when everything else in my life felt like it was breaking apart. I got up and wandered into the kitchen. The tile floor was cool under my feet, and the cabinet still bore the little flower decals she had painted decades ago. I opened one drawer and found the old cookie cutters we used every Christmas. Tears blurred my vision as I picked up the star-shaped one, remembering how she always said mine were the most beautiful, even though they were lopsided. It hit me then, this house wasn't just brick and wood, it was her. Every corner, every object carried pieces of her soul, and that's what they wanted. Not just the money, not just the land. They wanted to strip me of the last safe place I had in the world. I leaned against the counter, my breath shaky. "Why now, Grandma?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why did you have to leave me alone with them?" My words echoed off the kitchen walls, unanswered. Later that night, I pulled out a box from under her bed. Inside were photos, me at my high school graduation, her smiling proudly at my side, me blowing out birthday candles with only her clapping in the background, me asleep on the couch with a blanket she had knitted draped over me. There was not a single trace of my parents in any of them. It was as though she had erased them from our lives, and maybe that was her way of protecting me. At the bottom of the box, I found a letter, her handwriting looping across the page in faded ink. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "My dear Noel, if you're reading this, it means I am no longer there to fight for you. But you must fight for yourself now. Do not let them take what is yours. Remember that family is not just who shares your blood, it is who stays, who loves, who sacrifices. Protect what we built together, protect yourself." I pressed the letter to my chest, sobbing until my body ached. It felt like she had reached across time to speak to me, and with every word my grief twisted into something sharper, something stronger. The next morning I stood in front of the mirror, my eyes swollen from crying but my jaw set with determination. They thought I was the same abandoned child they had left behind. They thought I was weak, easy to manipulate. They didn't know that my grandmother had been preparing me for this moment my whole life. When my phone buzzed, I almost didn't answer it, but the caller ID flashed Mother. My stomach flipped, anger boiling beneath my skin. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Noel," her voice came softly through the speaker, too soft, too careful. "We should meet, talk about this civilly. We don't want things to get ugly." I laughed bitterly, the sound surprising even me. "It's already ugly," I snapped. "You made it ugly the day you left me on that porch." There was silence on the line. Then, with a sharp edge to her words, she said, "You'll regret this." And just like that, she hung up. I stared at my reflection in the mirror again, her threat still ringing in my ears. But instead of fear, I felt a fire ignite in my chest. I wasn't going to lose, not this time. The following days passed in a blur, but not the quiet blur of grief I had known after my grandmother's funeral. This time, it was chaos. My phone rang constantly, unknown numbers, reporters, even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly checking in. I didn't have to ask why. My parents had started talking. They weren't just coming for me in private anymore. They were painting me as the villain in public. It began with an article online. "Estranged daughter inherits fortune while parents fight for fair share." The headline made my stomach twist. The piece quoted my mother, her words dripping with sorrow. "We made mistakes, yes, but we never stopped loving her. We only want to reconnect and make sure she's not overwhelmed with such responsibility." I nearly choked on my coffee when I read that. Overwhelmed? She had no idea what that word even meant. Overwhelmed was being 12 years old and realizing no one was coming back for you. Overwhelmed was watching your grandmother work herself to exhaustion just to keep the lights on. They had abandoned me, and now they wanted to wear halos while painting me as the selfish one. By the second day, the story had spread everywhere, blogs, TV segments, even neighborhood gossip. People I barely knew started looking at me differently, their eyes filled with suspicion. The cashier at the grocery store whispered to her coworker as I walked out. A neighbor asked me, "So, are you really not letting your parents back into your life?" Her tone was sharp, almost accusing. I wanted to scream at all of them. Where were they when I was a child, left behind like a piece of trash? Where were they when my grandmother spent sleepless nights sitting by my bed while I cried myself hoarse? But instead, I swallowed the rage, letting it burn hotter inside me. If this was the game my parents wanted to play, I would play it better. On the third night, I sat at the kitchen table with my grandmother's letter spread out in front of me. The house felt quieter than usual, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. I reread her words, tracing the ink with my fingers. Protect what we built together. Protect yourself. Her voice in my head was clearer than ever. I decided then that I couldn't fight this alone. I needed help. Someone who understood the law, someone who could shield me from the tidal wave my parents were unleashing. That's when I called Ethan, a lawyer recommended by Claire, my only close friend. He sounded calm and steady on the phone, his voice carrying the kind of assurance I hadn't felt in weeks. "They can't just take this from you, Noel," he said firmly. "But you need to be ready. They won't back down easily." That night, I barely slept. I lay awake in my grandmother's bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the old house. Shadows stretched across the walls like reaching hands. I thought of my parents' faces in the lawyer's office, Daniel's smirk, my mother's crocodile tears, my father's cold threat. They weren't done with me. They were just getting started. The next morning, I opened the front door to find an envelope slipped under the mat. My name scrawled across it in rushed handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a legal notice. My parents were officially contesting the will. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words over and over, the letters blurring together. It was happening. The war I feared had begun. I sank onto the steps of the porch, the morning sun warming my skin, though I felt nothing but ice inside. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't strong enough to carry this on my own. But then I thought of my grandmother again, her laugh, her strength, her unwavering love. She had trusted me to protect what she built. If I gave in now, I'd be betraying everything she stood for. I wiped my tears, clutching the notice in one hand and the silver ring in the other. "You won't win," I whispered to the wind, as if sending the words to them. "Not this time." As I stood, determination flooding through me, I realized something important. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about survival, about reclaiming my voice after years of being silenced. And I was ready to fight, no matter how ugly it got. The legal notice sat on my kitchen table like a weapon aimed at my chest. It wasn't even heavy, just a few sheets of paper clipped together, but every time my eyes drifted toward it, I felt like the oxygen was being pulled from the room. The language was cold, sterile, written in phrases that sounded like they belonged to a machine. "We hereby contest the last will and testament of Vivian Briggs. We reserve the right to claim rightful inheritance as biological parents of Noel Briggs." Those words circled in my head, repeating like a curse. Rightful. I laughed bitterly under my breath the first time I read it. What was rightful about people who had walked away when I was 12? What was rightful about strangers who hadn't held my hand during my nightmares, who hadn't scraped together coins to buy me new shoes, who hadn't sat through every school play just to clap for me because no one else would? They wanted to talk about rights. My grandmother had earned every right they were now trying to steal. Claire came over that evening like she always did when she sensed I was falling apart. She didn't even ask if she could come in, she just walked through the door, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the cafe down the street. The smell of caramel latte filled the room, but I could barely taste it. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, pushing 1 cup toward me, her sharp eyes immediately landing on the envelope. "So that's it, huh?" she said, her voice low but steady. I nodded, my throat tight. "They're contesting the will, they're actually doing it." She picked up the papers and scanned them carefully, her eyebrows knit together, her lips pressing into a thin line. When she set them back down, her hand lingered for a moment on top of them like she was holding something toxic. "They're serious," she said finally. "And you need to be just as serious. Noel, you can't face this alone." "I know," I admitted, my voice cracking. "That's why I called Ethan." Claire leaned back in her chair, her expression softening. "Good, you'll need someone who understands how to fight this the right way. But you'll also need to be strong, stronger than you've ever been. They're not coming for you out of love, they're coming for blood, and they won't care what it does to you." Her words chilled me, but they were true. That night, after she left, I stayed up staring at the ceiling, the shadows on the walls twisting into shapes that reminded me of my parents' faces. I remembered my father's stern glare, my mother's crocodile tears, Daniel's smirk. My chest burned with anger, but underneath that, fear gnawed at me. Could I really stand against all of them? The next morning, I walked into Ethan's office downtown. The building was a tower of glass and steel, sunlight bouncing off its surface so brightly I had to squint. Inside, everything smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. His office was tidy but warm, lined with bookshelves that sagged with thick law volumes. On his desk were neatly stacked folders and a framed picture of a little girl laughing on a swing. I found myself staring at it for a moment, wondering what kind of father he was if his daughter ever worried he'd disappear like mine had. Ethan shook my hand firmly. His grip was strong, his gaze unwavering, the kind of presence that made you feel like the world hadn't completely caved in yet. "I've read through the notice," he said, motioning for me to sit. "It's aggressive, but not unusual in cases like this. They'll try to paint you as unstable, irresponsible, someone incapable of managing an estate of this size. It's a classic tactic." My chest tightened. "And if they succeed, then the court could appoint them as co-managers," he explained calmly. "Or worse, if they push hard enough and convince a judge you manipulated your grandmother, they could strip the inheritance entirely." The words made me feel like I'd been punched. Manipulated. I repeated, my voice breaking. "She loved me. She raised me. There was nothing to manipulate. I was all she had." Ethan's expression softened. "I believe you and will prove it, but you need to be prepared for them to twist every memory, every moment into something ugly. That's how they win, by rewriting your story until the court can't tell what's true anymore." I swallowed hard, the bitter taste of fear thick on my tongue. He was right. I couldn't just rely on the truth. I needed proof. That night, back at my grandmother's house, I found myself drawn to her study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and paper, a scent that always reminded me of safety. Her desk was still neat, just as she had left it, with stacks of folders tied together with colored ribbons. My hands shook as I untied the first ribbon, half afraid of what I might find. Inside were financial statements, letters from attorneys, even my old school records tucked neatly in their own envelope. My breath caught when I saw my handwriting on the report cards, her signature at the bottom of every line where a parent should have signed. And then I found it. At the bottom of one folder, buried under years of documents, was a notarized paper. My eyes scanned the words, my hands trembling harder with every line. It was a relinquishment of parental rights, dated 15 years ago. There, at the bottom, were their signatures, my father's sharp scrawl, my mother's delicate loops. Stamped and sealed, undeniable. Tears blurred my vision as I sank into her old desk chair. She had kept it all this time. She had known this day would come. She had prepared for me, even when I couldn't imagine a future without her. My chest heaved with sobs, a mixture of grief and gratitude. For the first time in days, the crushing weight on my chest lifted just a little. The next morning, I marched into Ethan's office clutching the document like it was a lifeline. He studied it in silence for a long moment, his brow furrowed. Then he looked up at me, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "This changes everything," he said. Hope surged through me. "So they can't win?" His smile faded into a more serious expression. "It makes our case strong, very strong, but don't think they'll go down quietly. People like your parents, when they're cornered, they fight dirtier. And your brother, he's the one to watch. He has nothing to lose and everything to gain." I nodded, gripping the edge of my chair until my fingers ached. "I'll be ready." "Good," Ethan said firmly. "Then let's get to work." That evening, I stood outside in the orchard. The trees were bare now, their branches reaching for the winter sky. I ran my hand along the rough bark, remembering my grandmother's laugh when she lifted me to pick apples, her hands steady even when mine shook. My breath fogged in the cold air as I whispered, "I'll protect this. I'll protect everything." But as I turned to head back toward the house, a chill prickled down my spine. At the edge of the yard, by the fence where the shadows gathered, I thought I saw someone standing. A dark shape, unmoving. My heart jumped into my throat, but when I blinked, the figure was gone. Only the rustle of branches in the wind remained. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. They were already watching me. The war had only just begun, and I was standing on the battlefield alone. The figure I thought I saw that night by the fence haunted me long after I went back inside. I checked the locks twice, drew the curtains, even left the hallway light on, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager afraid of storms. But the feeling lingered, that crawling sense that I was being watched, evaluated, measured for weakness. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was restless, filled with dreams of footsteps behind me and shadows creeping closer no matter how fast I ran. 2 days later, as I walked out of the grocery store with a bag of basics, milk, bread, coffee, I froze. Daniel was leaning casually against my car, arms crossed, as though he had every right to be there. He smiled when he saw me, a smile that never reached his eyes. "Hey, sis," he said smoothly, as if we just bumped into each other at a family reunion. I wanted to drop my bag and walk the other way, but my keys were in my hand, and he was blocking my door. "What do you want, Daniel?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He pushed off the car and shrugged. Just to talk. I figured it's been, what, 15 years? We've got a lot to catch up on. There's nothing to catch up on, I shot back. You made your choice when you stood with them. His smirk wavered slightly, but only for a second. Look, I know you're angry, I get it. But let's be real here, Noel. Grandma spoiled you, you were her favorite, and now you've got everything to prove it. This estate, it's too much for you to handle. The house, the land, the money, you'll drown in it, unless you've got someone like me to help. The way he said help made my skin crawl. I tightened my grip on the grocery bag until the carton of milk inside bent under the pressure. Help? Is that what you call swooping in to take what doesn't belong to you? Daniel sighed, shaking his head as though I were a stubborn child. This isn't about taking, it's about balance. You can't keep it all. That wouldn't be fair. I laughed bitterly. Fair? You think it's fair that she worked her whole life to give me a home while you stood by and let them walk away? You think it's fair that I spent nights wondering what I did wrong while you soaked up their love? Don't talk to me about fair. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, guilt maybe, or shame, but it vanished quickly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. This is bigger than you, Noel. Mom and Dad aren't going to stop. They'll drag you through court, through the media, through hell itself until you break, and when you do, you'll wish you had listened to me. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I forced myself to stand tall, even as fear gnawed at my stomach. Then I guess I'll see you in hell, I said quietly. Daniel's smirk returned, sharper this time. He leaned close enough that I could smell the mint on his breath. You're going to regret this, he whispered. Then he stepped back, patted the hood of my car as if it were his own, and walked away. My hands shook so badly that it took me 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. By the time I made it home, the milk had leaked inside the bag, soaking through the bread. I threw it all in the sink and collapsed against the counter, my heart still racing. His words replayed in my head like a dark prophecy. They'll drag you through hell until you break. The next morning, I woke to dozens of notifications on my phone. A video was circulating online, my parents, sitting in what looked like a staged living room giving an emotional interview. My mother's voice trembled as she said, "We only want what's best for Noel. She's had a difficult life and we regret the choices we made, but we want to make things right now. She needs guidance. She needs her family." I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Guidance? Family? They hadn't guided me anywhere but to the edge of abandonment. They hadn't been my family when I needed them most. Now they were using the world as their audience, spinning a story where they were the victims and I was the ungrateful daughter hoarding wealth I didn't deserve. By noon, the comments were pouring in. Some people sided with me, but many others echoed their narrative. She shouldn't cut out her parents completely. Family deserves a second chance. She sounds greedy. Each comment was another knife twisting in my chest. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen until my eyes burned. For a moment, doubt slithered in. Maybe the world would never believe me. Maybe the truth wasn't enough. My grandmother's words came back to me then from the letter she left behind. Protect what we built together. Protect yourself. I reached for the letter, unfolded it carefully, and read it aloud to steady myself. My voice cracked but grew firmer with each line. By the time I finished, my hands had stopped trembling. I folded the paper gently and placed it back in the box. That night, Ethan called. I saw the interview, he said. His voice was calm, but I could tell he was angry. They're trying to sway public opinion before we even set foot in court. Don't let it get to you. We'll counter it with evidence. What if no one believes me? I whispered. He paused. Then we make them believe. The law doesn't run on sympathy, it runs on proof. And thanks to what you found, we've got the upper hand. Hold on to that, Noel. They're loud, but you've got the truth. After we hung up, I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the shadows crawl across the walls. My grandmother's ring caught the moonlight, glinting like a promise on my finger. I whispered to the silence, I won't let them win. But deep down, I knew the battle had only just begun. The storm outside rattled the windows of the old house that night, but it wasn't the thunder that kept me awake. It was the voices, my parents' carefully crafted words from that interview replaying in my head, mixed with Daniel's whispered threat by my car. Every crack of thunder sounded like his voice, "You'll regret this." By dawn, I was exhausted, my eyes raw from lack of sleep, but I knew hiding under the covers wouldn't change anything. If they were waging war in public, I had to be ready to fight back in private. Ethan called me mid-morning. His tone was firm, clipped, the way a soldier might sound before battle. "We're going to need more than the relinquishment papers," he said. "They're strong, but your parents' team will attack their credibility. They'll claim duress, fraud, or even say your grandmother forged them. We'll need to bury them in proof." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "Proof like what?" "Anything that shows a pattern," he explained. Letters, receipts, school records, anything that demonstrates your grandmother raised you without their support. The more consistent the evidence, the harder it is for them to rewrite history. The idea of digging through my past felt heavy, like peeling open wounds that had never healed. But Ethan was right. If my parents were going to twist the truth, I had to anchor it in something undeniable. That afternoon, I went back into my grandmother's study. The room felt like a sanctuary and a battlefield all at once. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny soldiers waiting for orders. I pulled out the second box from under her desk, my hands trembling as though I were about to uncover secrets too painful to bear. Inside were envelopes, neatly bundled with rubber bands. I slid one open and found letters, dozens of them, addressed to my parents. My grandmother had written them over the years, pleading with them to visit me, to explain themselves, to take some responsibility. The ink faded over time, but the ache in her words was fresh. She asks about you every night. She doesn't understand why you don't call. She cried herself to sleep again. Please, for her sake, come see her. Tears blurred my vision as I read them. They had ignored every word, every plea, every chance to come back. My grandmother had given them opportunities to prove they still cared, and they had turned their backs again and again. At the bottom of the box, I found postcards I had written as a child, clumsy scrawls in crayon and pencil addressed to Mommy and Daddy. My grandmother must have mailed them, though none of them bore replies. I picked one up, my heart breaking as I read the shaky letters. I miss you, I am being good. Please come home. I clutched the postcard to my chest, the paper dampening as tears slid down my cheeks. All those years I had blamed myself, thinking maybe I wasn't enough. But here was proof that they had chosen absence, that they had ignored me even when I reached for them. When I showed Ethan the letters the next day, his jaw tightened. He flipped through them carefully, his eyes narrowing with every page. "This is exactly what we need," he said, his voice firm. "It paints a picture of neglect so clear even the best lawyer can't erase it. Combine this with the relinquishment papers, and we're building a wall they can't climb." "But what if they try anyway?" I whispered. "They will," he admitted. "And when they do, we'll knock them down, piece by piece." His confidence steadied me, though doubt still tugged at the edges of my mind. The public didn't know about these letters or the postcard written by a lonely child. All they saw were two parents crying on television, begging for forgiveness. The truth was heavier, hidden, buried in boxes under my grandmother's bed. It was my job now to bring it into the light. That evening, I sat in the living room with Claire, spreading the documents across the coffee table. She read them slowly, her hands covering her mouth. "Noel," she whispered, her voice breaking, "they don't deserve a second chance. They don't even deserve to say your name." Her anger gave me strength. For the first time in days, I felt less like a frightened girl and more like the woman my grandmother had raised. Still, in the back of my mind, Daniel's smirk haunted me. He wasn't going to give up. None of them were. Later, as I locked the front door for the night, I glanced out into the yard again. The orchard loomed in the moonlight, branches stretching like arms. And there, by the fence, I saw movement again. This time, I was sure of it. A figure lingering, watching. My pulse hammered in my ears, but when I threw the door open, the yard was empty. Only the cold night air rushed in. I shut the door quickly, bolting it tight. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe they really were watching, waiting for me to slip. Either way, one thing was certain. The fight was far from over, and the battlefield was no longer just in court. The next morning, I woke to the sound of pounding on my front door. My heart leapt into my throat as I stumbled down the hallway, half expecting to see Daniel or my parents barging in. But when I peeked through the curtain, I froze. Reporters. At least half a dozen of them, clustered on my porch like vultures, microphones and cameras ready. One of them shouted the moment they spotted movement inside. "Noel, do you have a statement about your parents' plea for reconciliation?" Another's voice overlapped, harsher. "Why are you refusing to let them back into your life? Don't you think you owe them forgiveness?" My chest tightened, panic clawing at my throat. I pressed my back against the wall, my grandmother's ring biting into my skin as I twisted it nervously around my finger. I wasn't ready for this. I hadn't even figured out how to survive the private war. Now they were dragging me into a public one. Claire showed up minutes later, pushing past the crowd to get inside. She shut the door firmly behind her, her eyes blazing with fury. "Don't you dare open that door," she snapped. "They want to twist every word out of your mouth. Don't give them the chance." "I can't just hide forever," I whispered. My voice shook, but the truth of it settled heavy on my shoulders. If I stay silent, their story wins. Everyone already thinks I'm greedy. Claire took my hands, squeezing them until I looked into her eyes. Then you don't stay silent, you tell the truth, on your terms, not theirs. Her words lit a spark inside me. That night, I sat at my grandmother's old desk with my laptop open, staring at the blank screen. My pulse raced, my fingers hovering above the keys. How could I condense years of abandonment, loneliness, and survival into something strangers would believe? Would they even care? I thought of the hateful comments that had already filled my phone, people calling me ungrateful, selfish. My throat closed up, but then I remembered the postcards, the desperate words of a child begging for her parents to come home. I remembered the letters my grandmother had written, pleading for them to care. And I realized the truth was bigger than my fear, so I began to type. I wrote about being 12 years old, standing on the porch as their car disappeared, clutching a teddy bear and wondering if I had done something wrong. I wrote about the nights I cried myself to sleep, about my grandmother's endless sacrifices, about the way she became both mother and father to me. I wrote about the postcards, the letters unanswered, the silence that grew louder with every year. And then I wrote about the day she died, the way my heart broke knowing she had carried so much alone, and the way it shattered even more when my parents returned, not to grieve, not to comfort, but to claim. When I finished, I was shaking, my face wet with tears. But for the first time, I felt lighter. I hit post before I could second-guess myself. The response was immediate. Within hours, my words had spread farther than I imagined. Some people still doubted me, but many more rallied behind me. Messages of support poured in from strangers. I believe you. They don't deserve a second chance. Stay strong, Noel. Claire sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through the comments. See, she said softly. The truth has power. You're not alone in this anymore. But not everyone was pleased. That evening, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my father. His voice was low, simmering with anger. You think you're clever, airing dirty laundry for the world to see? You've embarrassed us. You've made enemies you don't even realize yet. My grip tightened on the phone. You embarrassed yourselves the day you left me, I shot back. And the only enemies I have are the ones who made me their target. There was silence on the other end, heavy and dangerous. Then he spoke, his words sharp as glass. This isn't over, Noel, not by a long shot. When the line went dead, I sat frozen, the weight of his threat pressing down on me. For a moment, I wanted to curl into myself, to let the fear swallow me whole. But then I looked at the screen of my laptop, at the hundreds of messages from people who believed me, who saw me not as greedy but as a survivor. And I realized something important. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every abandoned child who had ever been told blood was all that mattered. I whispered to the empty room, my voice trembling but fierce. You're wrong. This ends with me. The days that followed felt like a countdown to war. Ethan had me in his office almost every afternoon, the two of us buried under piles of papers, witness statements, and timelines. His desk, once tidy, was now scattered with evidence. The relinquishment forms, my grandmother's letters, the postcards I had written as a child. Each item was a piece of armor we were stitching together for the battle ahead. We need to anticipate every angle, Ethan explained, his tone measured. He leaned across the desk, tapping one finger against the stack of letters. They'll claim your grandmother manipulated you. We counter with proof of neglect. They'll claim duress on the relinquishment. We show consistency across years of abandonment. They'll try to make you the villain. We paint the real picture. His calm precision steadied me, though a knot of fear still lived in my stomach. What if they come up with something unexpected? I asked. They will, he admitted. That's why we prepare for the worst, and when it comes, we make it work for us. I nodded, trying to believe him, though doubt crept in like shadows at dusk. That night, after another long session at Ethan's office, I returned home to find an envelope slipped under my door. My heart sank instantly. Another notice? With shaking hands, I tore it open. Inside was a copy of a financial document, stamped and signed, claiming that my grandmother had promised part of her estate to my parents years ago. The date on it was recent, but the signature at the bottom was hers. Or at least, it looked like hers. My breath caught. If this document were real, everything could unravel. I rushed to the phone and called Ethan, my voice trembling. They have something, I said, explaining what I'd found. Bring it in tomorrow, he replied, his voice sharp, urgent. Don't touch it more than you already have. I barely slept that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, the words on the page taunting me. What if it's real? My grandmother had never kept secrets from me, but doubt clawed at my chest. What if I didn't know everything? When I handed the document to Ethan the next morning, he studied it carefully under a magnifying glass. His brow furrowed as he compared the signature to others we had. Finally, he set it down with a grim look. "It's a forgery," he said flatly. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by fury. "They forged her signature." My voice cracked with rage. How could they stoop that low? Ethan met my eyes. "Because they're desperate. They know the relinquishment paper and the letters bury them. This is their counterattack. They'll present this as evidence and hope the judge hesitates, but if we prove it's fake, it backfires on them." My hands clenched into fists. "Then we prove it," he nodded. "We'll bring in a handwriting expert. We'll have the document analyzed down to the ink and the paper. If it's fake, we'll show the court how easily they tried to deceive it." For a moment, a flicker of satisfaction burned through my fear. They thought they could beat me with lies, but they had underestimated me. Later that day, Claire came by, her face pale after reading the latest headlines. The forged document had already leaked online, splashed across tabloids with screaming titles. Did Grandma really cut a secret deal? The narrative twisted fast, people questioning my integrity, accusing me of hiding the truth. I slammed the paper down on the table, my voice breaking. "It doesn't matter what I say, Claire. They'll always find a way to make me look like the liar." She grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to meet her eyes. "Then you show them, not just the court, not just Ethan, everyone. You shine a light so bright that their lies burn up before they can spread." Her words stuck with me. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, my grandmother's ring glinting in the dim light. For the first time, I spoke out loud the words I had only whispered in my head. "They're not going to win. Not this time. Not ever." But as I turned off the light and climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the image of that forged signature. It was a reminder that my parents weren't just going to fight dirty, they already were. And the war was only going to get uglier. The courthouse loomed ahead of me like a fortress. Its stone steps stretched wide, polished by the weight of countless shoes over the years. As I climbed them, my knees felt like they might buckle. The morning air was sharp, biting against my skin, but the real chill came from the cameras flashing in my face. Reporters swarmed the steps, shouting questions as I passed. "Noel, are you scared to face your parents in court? Do you think you manipulated your grandmother into cutting them out? Are you prepared to lose everything?" Each question pierced me like a needle. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them they knew nothing, but Ethan's voice echoed in my ear from earlier that morning. "Stay calm. Silence can be louder than words." So I kept walking, my chin high, though inside my stomach churned. When I entered the courtroom, the first thing I saw was Daniel. He sat beside my parents at their table, his suit crisp, his expression smug. He leaned back in his chair with the ease of someone who thought he'd already won. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, as though she were staring in a tragedy only she understood, while my father's jaw was set like stone, his glare drilling into me the moment I walked in. I sat at the opposite table with Ethan, clutching my grandmother's silver ring until it cut into my skin. He gave me a small nod, his calm presence a lifeline in the storm. "Remember," he whispered, "truth is on our side. Let them dig their own grave." The judge entered, calling the session to order. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder in my ears. My parents' lawyer rose first, a tall man with a slick voice that oozed confidence. He painted a picture of grieving parents, desperate to reconnect with the daughter they had tragically lost to bitterness. He spoke of family bonds, redemption, and a child too young to understand the complexities of adulthood. Each word made my blood boil. Too young, I had been old enough to understand abandonment. Old enough to feel the sting of silence when birthday after birthday passed without a single call. Then, with a flourish, he produced the forged document, holding it high as though it were the Holy Grail. "This," he declared, "proves that Mrs. Vivian Briggs intended to leave a portion of her estate to the biological parents, her son and his wife. This was her wish, her plan, before she passed." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My heart plummeted, even though I knew the truth. Ethan didn't flinch. When it was his turn, he rose slowly, every movement deliberate. He held the document with 2 fingers as though it were tainted. "Your Honor," Ethan began, his voice calm but firm, "what we've just been shown is not a sacred truth but a dangerous lie. This document is a forgery, and we intend to prove it." Murmurs broke out behind us. The judge raised an eyebrow, gesturing for Ethan to continue. Ethan walked to the evidence table, laying out copies of my grandmother's legitimate signatures spanning decades, checks, letters, legal forms. Then he compared them side by side with the alleged secret agreement. Even to my untrained eye, the difference was glaring. The strokes were uneven, the loops unnatural, the pressure inconsistent. Finally, Ethan called in an expert witness, a handwriting analyst with 30 years of experience. She testified clearly, pointing out the signs of forgery. By the time she finished, the courtroom buzzed with disbelief, this time directed at my parents' table. I looked over at them. My mother's face had gone pale, her tissue clutched too tightly in her hand. My father stared straight ahead, unblinking, while Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his smirk finally slipping. When the judge banged the gavel, declaring the forged document inadmissible, relief surged through me like a wave. Ethan sat back down, calm as ever, and whispered, "One battle down." But the victory was bittersweet, because as I glanced across the room, I saw the hatred burning in my father's eyes. He wasn't beaten, not yet. If anything, he looked more determined. After the session ended, I walked out into the hallway, my legs shaky but my head high. Reporters swarmed again, firing questions. For the first time, I didn't shrink away. "Did you know your parents would forge documents?" one asked. I looked straight into the camera, my voice steady. "I know my grandmother's truth. And I'll defend it, no matter what lies they spread." That clip made the evening news, played on repeat. Some viewers called me brave, others called me cold. But for once, I didn't care. I had survived my first day in court, and I hadn't broken. Still, that night, alone in my grandmother's house, I couldn't shake the memory of Daniel's expression when the forgery was exposed. It wasn't shame, it was calculation, as if he were already plotting their next move. And I knew, deep down, this was only the beginning of their darkest games. If the first day in court had been a victory, the days that followed felt like punishment for daring to win. The forged document had been thrown out, but my parents weren't retreating, they were retaliating. Everywhere I turned, their voices filled the world. It started with a new wave of interviews. My mother appeared on a morning talk show, her face tear-streaked, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. "I just want my daughter to understand that we love her," she said, clutching a framed photo of me at age 7. I stared at the screen in disbelief. That photo had been taken on my grandmother's porch, a day they hadn't even been there. But the host nodded sympathetically, handing her tissues as though she were the grieving victim. My father's appearances were colder, calculated. On one channel, he leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "Vivian was a stubborn woman," he said. "She had her opinions. But Noel was always a confused child, vulnerable. It's not her fault, she's simply repeating what she was taught." I nearly threw the remote at the TV. Vulnerable, confused, I had been abandoned, not brainwashed. But the words spread like poison, infecting comment sections and social media threads. Soon people I didn't know were dissecting my life like it was public property. One tweet read, "I don't buy her story. Parents don't just abandon a kid for no reason." Another, "She should be grateful they even want her back. Sounds greedy to me." Each comment was like a bruise. Claire sat beside me as I scrolled, snatching the phone from my hands before I could read more. "Stop," she said sharply. "This is exactly what they want. They want to break you down with strangers' voices, don't let them." But it wasn't just strangers. Old classmates started messaging me, some with pity, others with thinly veiled judgment. "Hey, saw you on TV. Crazy story. So is it true your grandma cut them out because you begged her to?" One message stung worse than the rest. "Family's family, Noel, maybe give them a chance." I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving. "Why does everyone think blood erases everything?" I cried out. "They weren't there, they didn't see what it was like." Claire hugged me tightly, but even her arms couldn't shield me from the suffocating weight of the world's opinions. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the house, each creak of the floorboards echoing in the silence. I paused by my grandmother's photo on the mantel. Her eyes seemed to watch me, calm and steady, reminding me of her letter, "Protect yourself." I whispered into the empty room, "I'm trying, Grandma, I really am." The next morning, Ethan called with news that made my stomach drop. "Your brother submitted a new piece of evidence," he said. "What now?" I asked, dread pooling in my gut. "A video," Ethan replied. "Allegedly showing you arguing with your grandmother, saying you deserved everything she owned." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I never said that." "I know," Ethan said, "but in the clip the audio is manipulated. It's grainy, spliced. We'll prove it's fake, but the damage, it's already spreading." By the time I checked online, the video had gone viral. Headlines screamed, "Noel Briggs caught demanding inheritance before grandmother's death." Clips of the doctored footage played on repeat, strangers dissecting every word, every pause. Some defended me, but many didn't. Wow, she really admitted it. Disgusting, manipulating an old woman like that. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. The walls felt like they were closing in. "How do I fight something like this?" I asked Claire, who had come over the moment she saw the news. "With the truth," she said firmly. "And with Ethan, he'll find a way to expose it." But her voice couldn't drown out the doubts clawing at my mind. Because deep down, I knew Daniel. He wasn't just trying to win a case. He wanted to break me. And if he was willing to forge signatures and fake videos, what else was he capable of? That night, as rain pounded against the windows, I sat in the dark, staring at the glow of my phone. Comment after comment scrolled past, accusing, mocking, doubting. My chest ached, and for a moment I thought I might shatter completely. But then I remembered the orchard, the smell of apples, the warmth of my grandmother's hand on mine. I remembered her voice saying, "You are stronger than you think." I wiped my tears and whispered into the storm, "You can try to destroy me, Daniel, but you'll never destroy her." And in that moment I felt it, a flicker of strength, small but steady, burning like a candle against the darkness. The morning the doctored video hit national news, I wanted to crawl into bed and disappear. The clip was everywhere, on TV, on social media, even replaying in the lobby of the courthouse when I walked in with Ethan. Strangers gave me side glances, some pitying, others disgusted. One woman muttered as I passed, "Shameful." I gripped my bag so tightly the strap dug into my palm. Inside the courtroom, Daniel smirked at me like a cat who had cornered its prey. My parents sat beside him, their faces masks of solemn grief, as though they were the victims of a cruel daughter. Judge called the session to order, and their lawyer wasted no time. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth, "we submit this recording as evidence of Ms. Briggs's intent to manipulate her grandmother for financial gain. The words speak for themselves." The video played on the screen at the front of the room. My voice echoed through the speakers, distorted, chopped, unnatural. "I deserve everything you own." My stomach churned. It wasn't me, but hearing my voice twisted that way made bile rise in my throat. I glanced at Ethan. He sat still, hands folded, face calm, but his eyes burned with quiet fury. When the clip ended, he stood. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "what you've just witnessed is not evidence, it's fraud. And we can prove it." He motioned toward the back of the courtroom, and a young man with messy hair and glasses stepped forward. "This is Caleb Morrison," Ethan introduced. "A digital forensics expert with 10 years of experience analyzing audio manipulation." Caleb took the stand, explaining how the audio had been spliced together from multiple sources. He showed waveforms, pointing out the unnatural breaks, the mismatched tones. "This is a forgery," he concluded. "The voice may sound like Ms. Briggs, but the recording has been tampered with. It cannot be considered authentic." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. I turned to see Daniel shifting in his chair, his smirk faltering. My mother's face flushed, while my father sat rigid, jaw clenched. When the judge ruled the video inadmissible, relief crashed over me so hard I nearly cried. Ethan leaned closer, whispering, "That's 2 strikes. They're digging their own grave." But the damage outside the courtroom was harder to undo. The clip had already spread across the internet. Even with proof it was fake, people clung to the scandal. The truth always traveled slower than lies. That night, drained from the day, I wandered through my grandmother's house. The walls felt like they were holding me up, each photo and trinket reminding me of who I was fighting for. In her bedroom, I opened her old jewelry box, running my fingers over the delicate necklaces and brooches she had cherished. At the bottom, tucked away in an envelope yellowed with age, I found something I had never seen before. It was a videotape. My breath caught as I turned it over in my hands. On the front, in her neat handwriting, was written, "For Noel, for when the time comes." My hands shook as I carried it downstairs. The house didn't even have a working VCR anymore, but I dug one out of the attic, dusted and clunky. When I finally got it working, the screen flickered to life. There she was. My grandmother, sitting in her favorite chair, the sunlight streaming through the orchard window behind her. My chest tightened as tears blurred my eyes. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes steady, her voice calm. "If you're watching this, my sweet Noel, it means I am no longer with you," she began. "But I need you to know the truth, not just in letters, but in my own voice. I chose you. I raised you. You are my heir, and no one else has the right to claim what we built together." I clutched my hands over my mouth as sobs racked my body. The tape continued, her voice unwavering. "If they come back, remember, their absence was their choice. They forfeited their claim the day they walked away. Do not let them make you doubt who you are or what you deserve. This estate is yours, always." The screen went black, but her words lingered, etched into me. Proof, living proof in her own voice and face. This wasn't just another letter, another piece of paper they could dismiss. This was undeniable. When I showed Ethan the tape the next morning, his eyes widened. He watched every second in silence, then leaned back, exhaling slowly. "This," he said, his voice low, "is the nail in their coffin." Hope surged inside me, fierce and steady. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was winning. But as I left Ethan's office that afternoon, I caught sight of Daniel waiting across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost. His eyes locked onto mine, his expression dark, dangerous. And in that moment, I knew he wasn't finished. If anything, he was about to get even uglier. The tape changed everything inside the courtroom. Ethan was confident it would destroy their claims once and for all. But Daniel wasn't the type to surrender. If anything, the glint in his eyes grew darker each time we walked past him. He wasn't just fighting a case anymore, he was fighting me. It started with whispers. At first, I thought I was paranoid. The same car parked across the street from my house 2 nights in a row. A man in a hoodie lingering near the grocery store aisle, watching me just a little too long. Footsteps behind me when I left Ethan's office late in the evening. One night, as I was locking up the front door, I found a note tucked under the mat. In sharp, messy handwriting, it read, "Drop the fight or you'll regret it." My hands shook as I crumpled it, my chest tightening with fear. I didn't tell Claire immediately, I didn't want to scare her, but I showed Ethan. His jaw tightened as he read it. "This is intimidation," he said. "Classic tactic. I'll file a report, but don't expect much." These things are hard to trace. The next day, things escalated. I returned home to find the living room window smashed, glass scattered across the floor. Nothing was stolen, but the mess felt like a message. Claire came rushing over when I called her, her face pale as she swept broken shards into a pile. "This isn't just about money anymore," she whispered. "He wants to break you, to scare you into giving up." I hugged my arms around myself, feeling the house that once sheltered me turn cold and hostile. My grandmother's walls couldn't keep the danger out. Meanwhile, Daniel played a different game in the courtroom. Their lawyer filed a new motion, claiming I was emotionally unstable and unfit to handle such a large estate. He brought up my therapy sessions after my grandmother's death, twisting them into proof that I was fragile, incapable. When their lawyer stood and declared, "Ms. Briggs suffers from unresolved trauma, clouding her judgment and making her incapable of responsibly managing her inheritance," I felt heat flood my face. My parents nodded solemnly beside him, pretending to be concerned about my well-being. Ethan rose slowly, his expression unreadable. "Your Honor," he said, "grief is not incompetence, and if loving her grandmother deeply disqualifies her, then we should all be disqualified from love itself." His words were measured, powerful, the kind that made people stop and think. But still, the accusation hung in the air like a stain. Outside, the narrative spread quickly. Headlines now read, "Is Noel Briggs too fragile to handle her grandmother's estate?" Strangers speculated about my mental health as though it were entertainment. The whispers grew louder, and I could feel my strength thinning, like a rope fraying under too much weight. That night, Claire sat with me on the porch, her hand over mine. "You can't let him do this," she said fiercely. "You can't let him define you with lies." I stared out at the orchard, the branches swaying in the night breeze. "But what if people believe him?" I whispered. "What if the court believes him?" "Then you fight harder," she said. "You've already survived worse than their lies." The next morning, as I stepped out to get the mail, I froze. Sprayed across the side of the house in bold red paint were the words, "Greedy liar." My knees nearly buckled. My hands trembled so badly I dropped the mail on the ground. Neighbors came out of their houses, staring, whispering. Someone even lifted their phone, recording me as if I were some scandal to post online. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't just a court battle anymore. This was war. Daniel was dragging me into the dirt, using fear, shame, and humiliation as his weapons. But as I stood there, staring at the vandalized wall, something inside me shifted. Rage burned through the fear, hot and fierce. I thought of my grandmother, her steady voice on the tape. "Do not let them make you doubt who you are or what you deserve." I lifted my head, my voice trembling but strong. "You picked the wrong person to scare, Daniel." The day we played the tape in court, the entire room fell silent. I sat rigid in my chair, my palms sweating as the screen flickered to life. And then, there she was. My grandmother, alive again in sound and image, sitting in her favorite chair with the orchard glowing behind her. "If you're watching this," her voice rang clear, "then I am no longer with you. But I want it known, I chose Noel, I raised her. She is my heir. No one else has the right to claim what we built together." The words hit me like a wave, washing away months of fear and self-doubt. I blinked furiously, refusing to cry here, not in front of them. But across the room, I saw Daniel's smirk vanish, saw my mother clutch the table edge, saw my father's face darken with barely contained rage. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The authenticity of the tape had already been verified by an expert Ethan brought in, a video forensics analyst who confirmed it had not been tampered with. When the tape ended, the silence that followed was heavy, undeniable. Ethan rose, his voice calm but cutting. "Your Honor, this is not the voice of hearsay. This is Mrs. Vivian Briggs herself in her own words, making her wishes clear. Noel is her rightful heir, the rest is noise." For the first time, I felt the tide shift tangibly. The murmurs in the courtroom favored me now. People weren't just seeing me as a frightened girl, they were seeing me as my grandmother's chosen legacy. But Daniel wasn't finished. He stood abruptly, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, while the tape may be moving, we must not forget the larger context. We have uncovered new evidence that calls into question Noel's integrity." A chill shot down my spine. Their lawyer produced a folder and slid it onto the evidence table. Inside were bank statements showing large transfers into my account over the past year. "These transactions," he declared, "prove that Noel pressured her grandmother into giving her money while she was still alive. This is not the act of a loving granddaughter, but of manipulation." Gasps rippled through the room. My stomach dropped. I leaned toward Ethan, whispering frantically, "That's not true. She gave me money sometimes, help with rent, groceries, but never like that, never thousands at once." Ethan's brow furrowed as he flipped through the papers, his jaw tightened. "These are falsified," he muttered. "The numbers don't match her bank records we already have." But Daniel knew what he was doing. He wasn't trying to prove the truth, he was trying to plant seeds of doubt. Already I could feel eyes burning into me, judging, weighing, wondering if I had been lying all along. The judge frowned, requesting time to review the documents. Court adjourned early that day, but the damage was immediate. Outside, reporters swarmed like hornets, shoving microphones in my face. "Noel, did you take money from your grandmother before her death? Were you draining her accounts? Is that why she left everything to you?" I couldn't breathe. Claire shoved them back, yelling at them to leave me alone, but the questions echoed in my skull long after we made it to her car. That night, Ethan came to the house, his briefcase heavy with files. He spread them across the dining table, his expression grim but focused. "These records," he said, tapping the forged statements, "are not from her actual bank. The format's wrong. The balances don't align with the verified ledgers we subpoenaed. They faked this, just like the will, just like the video." I buried my face in my hands. "They won't stop, will they? They'll burn the whole world down if it means I lose." Ethan's voice softened. "That's what people do when they're desperate. They throw everything at the wall, hoping something sticks. But the truth, it always sticks harder." Claire set a cup of tea in front of me, her voice steady. "Then we fight back with the truth, again and again, until there's nothing left of their lies." I lifted my head, exhausted but burning with a new kind of fire. "Fine. Let's burn their lies to the ground." The next court session was suffocating. The so-called bank statements sat in a neat stack on the evidence table, their weight heavier than stone. Reporters whispered from the gallery, their pens ready to carve headlines before the truth even had a chance to breathe. Daniel leaned back in his chair, that smug grin plastered across his face. He thought he'd cornered me, that this latest fabrication would be the final nail in my coffin. My parents wore matching expressions of solemn disappointment, like grieving saints betrayed by their own child. When the judge asked Ethan to respond, he rose with his usual calm. "Your Honor," he began, "the plaintiffs have presented documents that, at first glance, appear to implicate my client, but appearances can be deceiving." He motioned to the door, and a woman entered, carrying a slim folder. "This is Karen Donovan," Ethan explained, "a senior officer from the bank where Mrs. Briggs held her accounts for over 40 years. Karen took the stand, adjusting her glasses as she spoke. "We reviewed the records submitted. These are not ours. The formatting is inconsistent with our system, and several transactions listed here are impossible. For instance, one date shows a transfer on a Sunday. Our system does not process transfers on Sundays." The courtroom buzzed. Ethan flipped open another folder, laying down authenticated statements. "Here are the actual records. Notice the differences in account numbers, headers, and transaction codes. The documents presented by the plaintiffs are forgeries." Daniel's smirk faltered, his jaw tightening. My mother shifted uncomfortably, my father avoided the judge's eyes, but Ethan wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Furthermore, the metadata embedded in these digital files, provided by the plaintiffs, shows that they were created on a home computer 3 weeks ago, not issued by the bank. In fact, the user account name attached to the file creation is D. Briggs." The words detonated like a bomb. For a moment, silence hung heavy, then an audible gasp rippled through the room. I turned, my heart racing, to see Daniel's face drain of color. The judge raised an eyebrow, his tone icy. "Mr. Briggs, are you suggesting your client created these documents?" Daniel stammered, his composure cracking. "And no, Your Honor, there must be some mistake, but the damage was done." The courtroom was no longer looking at me. Every pair of eyes had shifted to him. I felt something I hadn't in weeks: vindication. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, "Do not let them make you doubt who you are." For once, it wasn't me under scrutiny, it was him. When the session adjourned, the hallway outside erupted with chaos. Reporters swarmed Daniel, firing questions. "Did you forge financial records? Did you try to frame your sister? Is this fraud?" He shoved past them, his mask of control shattered. My parents trailed behind him, faces pale and tight. Ethan placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "This is it, Noel." He overplayed his hand, and now the court sees it. That night, I returned home, the weight of weeks of fear beginning to lift. Claire opened a bottle of wine, pouring us each a glass. "He messed up," she said with a grin. "Finally," I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in so long. But beneath the relief, a flicker of unease lingered, because Daniel wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. He was cornered now, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the image of his face when Ethan revealed the metadata. Shock, yes, but also something else. A flicker of calculation, a silent vow. This wasn't over. Not yet. The courtroom was buzzing like a hive ready to explode. Daniel's name now hung heavy in the air, no longer as the golden son, but as the man who may have committed fraud. I could see it in the way the reporters whispered, the way the jury eyed him, the way even my parents shifted away from him like his disgrace might stain them too. But Daniel didn't crumble. He doubled down. The very next session, he stormed into the courtroom with a new folder clutched in his hand, his expression sharp, almost manic. "Your Honor," he announced before the judge could even settle in, "we have one final piece of evidence that will prove my sister is unfit to inherit." I felt my stomach twist. What now? Their lawyer laid out the folder on the table with a flourish. Inside were photos, grainy shots of me, late at night, sitting at a bar with Claire. Another of me crying on my porch, head in my hands. Another of me walking into Ethan's office, his hand briefly on my shoulder. "As you can see," their lawyer said smoothly, "Ms. Briggs has been emotionally unstable, relying on questionable relationships, possibly even an inappropriate one with her attorney. We submit this as proof that she is mentally and morally unfit." Heat surged up my neck. "That's insane," I burst out, unable to stop myself. "He's my lawyer, not..." But Ethan rose calmly, his eyes cutting into Daniel. "Your Honor, surveillance without consent is not evidence, it is harassment, and these photographs prove nothing except desperation. If anything, they show the lengths Mr. Briggs will go to in order to intimidate his sister." The judge's frown deepened, but before he could respond, Ethan added, "And there's something else. These photos weren't taken by a private investigator, as claimed. They were taken by someone with access to the house across from Ms. Briggs's residence. We subpoenaed the landlord records this morning." He slid another document across the table. "That rental property, leased under the name of one Daniel Briggs." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's face went white. My mother gasped, covering her mouth. My father's jaw tightened, but I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. The reporters in the gallery nearly fell over themselves to scribble it down. The judge's gavel slammed against the bench. "Mr. Briggs, are you admitting that you spied on your sister?" Daniel sputtered, his composure unraveling. She's lying. She's manipulating everyone," but his voice cracked, and in that crack the truth poured out. He had been watching me. He had been stalking me, and now everyone knew. I felt a strange stillness settle over me. For weeks, I had carried the weight of their lies, their slander, their intimidation. And now, for the first time, the mask had fallen from Daniel's face in front of everyone. He wasn't the golden son anymore. He was exposed. The judge's tone was sharp, final. "This behavior borders on criminal harassment. This court will not tolerate such actions. The credibility of the plaintiff's case is now severely compromised." As we left the courtroom, reporters swarmed, their voices firing questions like bullets. "Daniel, why did you spy on your sister? Was the bank fraud your idea too? Is this the end of your case?" Daniel shoved past them, his eyes wild, his mask completely gone. My parents trailed behind, their carefully crafted personas shattered, no longer able to hide behind grief and false virtue. I stood on the courthouse steps, the cameras flashing, and for the first time I did lower my head. I looked straight ahead, steady, strong. The war wasn't finished, the verdict was still ahead, but the battlefield had changed. For once, I wasn't the one on trial. And deep down, I knew, my grandmother's truth was finally breaking through the lies. The final day of the trial dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that felt like it was holding its breath. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, adjusting my black blazer, my grandmother's silver ring gleaming faintly on my finger. For weeks, I had been tossed between fear and fury, crushed beneath the weight of lies. But today was different. Today, I felt steady. Claire drove me to the courthouse, her hand occasionally brushing mine, grounding me. "No matter what happens in there," she said softly, "you've already won. You stood up to them. You didn't let them take your voice." I smiled faintly, though my stomach twisted into knots. "But I need more than my voice," I whispered. "I need justice." The courthouse steps were swarmed with cameras, reporters, strangers craning for a glimpse of the broken family drama they had been devouring for weeks. But when I walked past them, chin high, I felt something shift. I wasn't just the story anymore. I was the one writing its ending. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table, his posture rigid, his jaw tight. Gone was the smugness, replaced with something more dangerous: desperation. My parents looked smaller than ever beside him, their eyes avoiding mine. The judge entered, the gavel striking wood like thunder. "This court will hear closing arguments," he announced. Their lawyer stood first, his voice oily smooth but lacking its earlier confidence. He tried to weave a picture of redemption, of parents misunderstood, of a son unfairly painted as the villain. But his words rang hollow. The cracks were too deep now. The forged documents, the doctored video, the stalking. Each sin lingered in the air like smoke, impossible to fan away. Finally, it was Ethan's turn. He rose slowly, buttoning his jacket, and for a moment the room stilled. He didn't rush. His voice was measured, steady, but carried the weight of truth like a blade. "This case is not about greed. It is not about redemption. It is about abandonment. 15 years ago, a child was left behind. She was told she wasn't worth the effort of love. Her grandmother stepped in, gave her shelter, gave her life, gave her everything. That grandmother, Mrs. Vivian Briggs, made her wishes clear, in writing, in testimony, in her own voice recorded for this very moment. She chose Noel." He turned slightly, his hand gesturing toward me. My throat tightened, but I held myself tall. "The plaintiffs have come here with forged documents, manipulated videos, fabricated financial records, and harassment tactics that border on criminal. They have shown this court who they are through their actions, and actions, Your Honor, speak louder than tears on a witness stand." The room buzzed softly with murmurs. Ethan's words cut through me, both painful and liberating. Because they weren't just about the case, they were about my life, about everything I had carried alone. The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable. "This court will recess. A decision will be rendered this afternoon." The gavel struck, and just like that, the waiting began. Claire and I sat in the hallway, the hum of voices around us blurring into white noise. My hands trembled despite my determination, my body betraying the storm inside me. "What if?" I began, but Claire squeezed my hand before I could finish. "No what ifs," she said. "You've done everything you could. Now it's in their hands. But remember, justice already lives in yours." I leaned my head against the cool wall, closing my eyes. My grandmother's face appeared in my mind, her voice clear as if she were right beside me. "This estate is yours. Always." When the doors opened again hours later, my pulse roared in my ears. It was time. The days after the verdict passed in a blur. Headlines screamed my name, but this time not with accusations. "Heiress vindicated. Court rules in favor of abandoned daughter." Some outlets still twisted the story, painting me as a tragic figure, others as a fighter who had stood against impossible odds. But I didn't care anymore. For the first time in my life, the noise outside couldn't touch me. The house felt different too. The walls that once carried whispers of fear now seemed lighter, warmer, as though my grandmother's spirit had finally been set free. I walked through the orchard, the air thick with the smell of apples, and for the first time since her death, I didn't feel only grief. I felt her pride, her love. One evening, I sat at the old desk, the same one where I had written that first trembling post to the world. I opened my laptop and began typing again. This time, not out of fear or defense, but out of choice. I wrote about the trial, about the lies, the intimidation, the way the world tried to tell me that blood was stronger than truth. And I wrote about how I learned to stand anyway, how I realized that family isn't the people who abandon you, it's the people who choose you, who stay, who fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. I ended with my grandmother's words, "This estate is yours, always." And then I added my own, "But more than that, my life is mine, always." When I hit publish, I didn't care if strangers believed me or not, because I finally believed myself. Claire joined me on the porch that night, 2 mugs of tea steaming in the cool air. "So what now?" she asked, her eyes curious but soft. I looked out at the orchard, the leaves rustling in the breeze. For the first time, the question didn't terrify me. "Now," I said slowly, a smile tugging at my lips. "Now I live, for me, for her, for the little girl who thought she wasn't worth staying for." She squeezed my hand, and in that moment I realized something. The inheritance wasn't just money or property. It was a chance to build a life free from the chains of abandonment, a life defined by choice, not fear. Weeks later, I returned to the courthouse, not as a defendant but as a witness in the case against Daniel. Watching him sit where I once sat, squirming under the weight of his own lies, I felt no triumph, no gloating satisfaction, just release. The war was over. On the drive home, I rolled down the window, the wind tangling my hair, the city lights blurring past. And I whispered into the night, a promise carried on the wind. "I'm free now, Grandma, and I'll make you proud." I don't know if my story will inspire anyone else or if it will simply fade into the sea of headlines and gossip. But I do know this: I survived, I fought back. And I won not just the estate, not just the case, but myself. And if anyone out there is listening, anyone who has ever been told that they are less, that they are unwanted, that their voice doesn't matter, I hope they hear me now. You are stronger than the lies they tell about you. You are worth more than the love they withhold. And you can write your own ending, because I did.